My nephew smashed my late mother's $11,000 violin at a family reunion. My sister said we had to forgive and move on. I waited 6 months, then handed a folder to the local news. My nephew smashed my mother's violin on the concrete floor of the fellowship hall, and my sister Rachel told me to forgive and move on before the strings had stopped vibrating. I didn't argue with her. I picked up the pieces, drove home alone, and opened a new folder on my desktop. 6 months later, a reporter named Kate sat across from me at a booth at Cracker Barrel on the south side of Oklahoma City and slid a recorder between our coffee cups. "Look, if you're still here, you're invested. A like and subscribe costs you nothing and it helps us find more unhinged stories like this one. We both win." Okay, back to the story. What ran the following Thursday named Rachel by first name and referenced her franchise license number in the second paragraph. I should tell you who my mother was before I tell you what Rachel did to her memory. Her name was Margaret. She had played violin since she was 7 years old, studying under a teacher in a small church outside of Tulsa for 13 years before she could afford her own instrument. The violin she eventually bought, a German workshop instrument from the late 1800s, appraised at $11,200 when she died, lived in a black case lined with burgundy velvet on the top shelf of her bedroom closet. She played it at her own wedding. She played it at mine. She played it every Sunday morning at Grace Fellowship Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, for 31 years, until her hands got too stiff and she had to stop. When she died in March of last year, the violin was the one item she had listed by name in her handwritten letter of personal property distribution. She left it to me. I am Laura. I am 53 years old. I work as a records administrator for a hospital network in Oklahoma City. I am not dramatic. I do not make scenes. I document things. My mother taught me that too. Rachel is my younger sister by 4 years. She and her husband James own 2 franchise sandwich shops in the greater Oklahoma City area, one in Midwest City. They have 3 kids. The youngest, Tyler, is 11. Tyler has always been what the family calls spirited. What the family means is that Tyler has never once experienced a consequence in his 11 years on Earth, and everyone around him has quietly organized their behavior to avoid triggering the explosion that follows when he doesn't get what he wants. I want to be specific about Tyler's history, because what he did to my mother's violin was not a one-time thing. It was the latest in a pattern that the family had been excusing for years. 3 years before the reunion, at my niece's 8th birthday party, Tyler knocked a cake off the table because he was told he couldn't have a second piece of ice cream. Rachel said he was overwhelmed by noise. 2 years before the reunion, Tyler took a box cutter from my garage while we were helping me move a bookcase and sliced a 4-foot gash in the side of a cardboard box that turned out to contain my grandmother's china. Rachel said he didn't know what was in the box. He was 9 years old. He knew. I had already started keeping notes by then. Not because I had a plan. Just because I document things. It's who I am. The reunion was held the last Saturday in August, 11 months after my mother's burial. Grace Fellowship's Fellowship Hall, the same room where my mother had played violin at the Christmas concert every December for 3 decades, was booked for the afternoon by the family. It was technically a memorial gathering as much as a reunion. Someone had hung a framed photo of my mother near the entry. Potluck dishes on folding tables. Someone brought her favorite lemon bars. The violin was there because I had brought it, because my cousin James, not Rachel's husband, a different James, my mother's nephew on her brother's side, had asked if he could see it. He plays guitar. He had heard about the instrument for years. I carried the case in myself and set it on the corner table near the window, still closed, planning to open it when James arrived. I was in the kitchen helping carry out dishes when Tyler found it. I heard it before I saw it. A crack, then a hollow resonant crash, like something dropped from a height onto concrete. Then silence. Then Tyler's voice, "It broke." I walked out of the kitchen. The case was on the floor, open, and the violin was in 2 pieces on the concrete. The neck had separated from the body. The bridge was gone. 2 of the 4 strings hung loose. The back plate had cracked along a seam that my mother's luthier had repaired years earlier and which would not survive being repaired a second time. Tyler was standing over it with his hands in his pockets, looking not at the violin but at me, with an expression I can only describe as mildly interested in my reaction. He was just looking at it, Rachel said from across the room. She was already moving toward Tyler, hand out, shepherding him back from the wreckage. He just wanted to see it. The case was latched, I said. Rachel didn't answer that. I crouched down and picked up the body of the violin. The wood was warm from the afternoon light. My mother's rosin was still on the strings. My hand was steady. My stomach was not. My Aunt Linda was there. My cousin James was there, the one who plays guitar, who had come specifically to see the instrument and was now standing in the doorway to the hall with his hand over his mouth. My Uncle Brian was there. 11 other family members were in that room or the kitchen doorway, watching. Rachel said, "We'll figure out the repair cost, Laura. These things happen." "The back plate is cracked," I said. "It can't be repaired. Insurance might cover it." I stood up. I set the body of the violin down gently on the table. I looked at my sister and I said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say in that moment in front of 11 family members, and I knew it. My Uncle Brian said, "Rachel, your son needs to apologize." Rachel said, "He didn't mean to hurt anything. He's a kid." Tyler did not apologize. What Rachel said to me later, privately, in the parking lot before I drove home, was this: "We are family. Family forgives and moves forward." That's what Mom would have wanted. I looked at her. I said, "Okay." I drove home. I opened my laptop. I started a new folder. The folder was already less empty than Rachel knew. Because here is the thing about keeping notes out of habit. When Tyler sliced my grandmother's china box 2 years earlier, I had photographed the damage and written a single paragraph in a document I kept in a folder called Household Incidents. Just dates, descriptions, dollar amounts where I could estimate them. I had done the same after the birthday cake. And after the time Tyler threw a rock through the window of my back door during a 4th of July cookout in 2022 and Rachel told me she would handle it, meaning she did not handle it, meaning the $340 window repair came out of my own pocket. I had 3 incidents documented before I added the violin. The violin was different. The violin was worth $11,200. The violin was the specific named bequest in my mother's handwritten letter, which the estate attorney, a woman named Alex, calm and methodical, who had handled my mother's estate paperwork since the previous spring, had filed as a supplement to the formal will. Alex had a copy of that letter. I had a copy. It was in the estate file. The violin was not Tyler's to touch. It was mine, legally transferred, documented. I called Alex on Monday morning. I told her what had happened. I told her about the appraisal, the estate letter, Tyler's documented history of destruction. I told her what Rachel had said in the parking lot about family forgiving and moving forward. Alex was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The letter of personal property distribution is supplemental to the will. The violin is your property. Has been since probate closed." I know. Tyler is a minor. Rachel and James are liable as his parents. I know that too. What do you want to do? I said, I want to do it right. And I want to understand everything I'm working with before I do anything. Alex said she would pull the estate file and call me back by end of week. In the meantime, I had other things to understand. The franchise connection had been nagging at me since I got home. Rachel and James's 2 sandwich franchises operated under a parent brand with a regional licensing agreement. I didn't know the specifics of that agreement, but I knew franchise licensing existed and that it typically involved standards of conduct, brand reputation clauses, background checks. I also knew, because Rachel had mentioned it at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier, in the context of bragging, that they were in the process of applying for a 3rd location in Yukon. I knew one other thing: my mother's nephew on her brother's side, my cousin James, the guitar player who had been standing in the fellowship hall doorway with his hand over his mouth, worked for the state. I had known this in the vague way you know things about extended family without knowing the specifics. He worked in some kind of auditing or oversight capacity. I had never asked for details. I texted James the week after the reunion. "Can I ask what you do exactly?" He replied within an hour. "State Auditor's office." Why? I sat with that for a moment. Then I typed, "Can we have coffee?" We met that Thursday at a coffee shop in Norman. James is 41, 6 years younger than me, with our grandmother's dark eyes and a careful way of listening that I have always appreciated. He ordered black coffee and let me talk without interrupting. I told him everything. The violin. The prior incidents. Rachel's parking lot speech. The franchise application. He listened. He drank his coffee. When I finished, he said, "I want to be careful about what I say here, because there's stuff I can't comment on officially. But I want you to know, and this is just me as your cousin talking, that franchise licensing applications go through a review process at the state level. And that process is thorough." He looked at me steadily. I said, "I didn't know that." He said, "Most people don't." I nodded and held my coffee cup with both hands. I didn't say anything else, and neither did he, but we both understood what had just been communicated. I drove home and added a section to my folder. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked methodically. I was not angry, or rather, I was angry, but I put it somewhere it couldn't interfere with the work. Every evening after dinner, I spent 45 minutes at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad. I contacted the luthier who had last appraised my mother's violin. He was a retired instrument restorer who worked out of a studio in Tulsa. He was in his 70s and had known my mother for years. When I described what had happened, he was quiet in the way that people who love instruments go quiet when they hear something irreversible. He confirmed in writing that the instrument could not be restored to playable condition, that the crack in the back plate compromised the structural integrity of the entire instrument, and that the pre-incident appraised value was $11,200. He sent me a signed letter on his studio letterhead. I requested the estate file from Alex and photographed every relevant document. The supplemental letter of personal property distribution. The appraisal. The probate close date. I went back through my phone and found the texts Rachel had sent me in the days after the reunion. There were 4 of them. The first said, "I know yesterday was hard. Tyler feels bad." He had not looked like someone who felt bad. He had looked mildly interested. But I didn't say that. The second said, "I think we should just agree to move on. That's what Mom would have wanted." The third said, "James and I talked and we think the violin was probably more sentimental than actual value. Like emotionally valuable, not financially." The fourth said, 2 weeks later when I hadn't responded, "Laura, are you seriously going to let this come between us? We are family. Family forgives and moves forward." I screenshotted all 4. I added them to the folder. I also, in the course of ordinary conversation at my mother's church, where I still attended, where my mother had played violin for 31 years, learned something I had not known. There had been a small item in the church bulletin 3 weeks before the reunion. A note from the deacon board acknowledging a generous donation to the building fund from a local business owner. The donation had been made in my mother's name, as a memorial gift. Rachel's name was on the acknowledgement. Rachel had donated $500 to the church building fund in my mother's memory. I do not think the donation was wrong. I think Rachel made it because she genuinely wanted to honor our mother. I also think Rachel made it because Rachel is aware of optics. I added it to the folder because it was relevant context. I had a small cedar box on my mother's side table that I had taken home after clearing her house. Inside were cards and letters, the way people of her generation kept things. At the bottom of the box, under birthday cards and a folded church program from 1987, was a greeting card with a handwritten note in my mother's careful script, addressed to no one, just words she had written to herself at some point in the years before she died. It said, "The truth doesn't need you to defend it. Just preserve it." I read it twice. I put it back in the box. I went back to my folder. By mid-October I had, the luthier signed appraisal and damage assessment. The estate letter naming the violin to me. The probate close documentation. For screenshotted texts from Rachel explicitly asking me to move on without compensation. My documented incident record from the prior 3 years. A quote from a small claims court reference guide that confirmed parents are liable for willful property destruction by minor children in Oklahoma. And a quiet conversation with my cousin James from which I had drawn my own conclusions. I called Alex. "I want to send Rachel a formal demand letter," I said. "Reimbursement for the appraised value. $11,200. Alex was quiet for a moment. "Before or after you pursue other avenues?" "Before. I want her to have the opportunity to do the right thing." Alex drafted the letter. It was 2 pages, formal, calm. It cited the probate documentation, the luthier's assessment, and the Oklahoma statute on parental liability for minors' willful destruction of property. It requested a response within 30 days. I sent it via certified mail on a Tuesday in late October. Rachel called me the same day it was delivered. I know because Alex had arranged for delivery confirmation and the call came 3 hours after the signature timestamp. "Are you actually suing me?" Rachel said. She was not yelling, but her voice had the tight quality that precedes yelling. "I sent a demand letter," I said. "That's different from a lawsuit. A demand letter is an invitation to resolve something before it becomes a lawsuit." "Laura. This is insane. Tyler is a child. Tyler is 11. He unlatched a case that belonged to me, removed a fragile antique instrument, and dropped it on a concrete floor. He was curious. He was told not to touch it. You weren't even in the room. That's not a defense, Rachel." Silence. "Then, I am not paying you $11,000 for an old violin. We are family. Family forgives and moves forward. Do you know what Mom would think if she saw you doing this?" There it was again. That exact sentence. Family forgives and moves forward. I had been waiting for it. I said, "I'll expect a written response within 30 days. "You'll get a response," she said, and hung up. The written response came from Rachel and James's personal attorney 8 days later. It was a single page. It stated that Tyler's contact with the instrument was accidental, that no willful destruction had occurred, that the claimed value of the instrument was unsubstantiated, and that any legal action would be vigorously defended. I forwarded it to Alex. Alex called me that afternoon. They hired someone fast, she said. That means they're worried. Or James called a fraternity brother who does contracts, I said. Alex laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. Either way, she said, they've refused the demand. You can file in small claims, the limit in Oklahoma is $10,000, so you'd be just under. Or district court for the full amount, which is more expensive and slower. What do you want to do? I want to think about it for 2 weeks, I said. I was already thinking about something else. I had sent Rachel the demand letter first because it was the right thing to do. I had given her 30 days and she had used 8 of them to lawyer up and tell me the destruction was accidental. She had taken away my last reason to go quietly. I called Kate the following Monday. Kate was 44 years old, a features reporter for a regional news outlet that covered Oklahoma City metro and surrounding communities. She had broken a story 2 years earlier about a franchise food operation that had falsified health inspection records. I had read it at the time without knowing I would ever need to remember it. I found her contact information on the outlet's website. I sent her an email. I said I had a story about a local franchise owner, a family dispute, property destruction, and a state review process. I said I had documentation. I said I would share everything I had. She replied in 4 hours. Can you meet? We met at Cracker Barrel on a Thursday evening in mid-November. Kate was tall, wore glasses, brought a recorder and a legal pad, and asked very precise questions. She did not express sympathy or indignation. She listened the way good reporters listen, which is to say she listened like she was building a structure out of whatever I gave her. I gave her the folder. Not copies, the original stayed with me, but I walked her through every document. The appraisal letter. The estate documentation. The demand letter. Rachel's response texts. The attorney's refusal letter. My incident record going back 3 years. I also told her about James. I did not tell her that James was a state auditor. I told her that a family member had mentioned, in passing, that franchise licensing applications went through a state-level review process. I told her that Rachel and James were actively applying for a 3rd location in Yukon. Kate wrote something on her legal pad. Then she looked up. Can I make some calls? That's why I'm here, I said. I drove home. I felt the way you feel when you have set something in motion that you cannot call back, which is both frightening and steady, the way a long exhale feels after you have been holding your breath. I did not hear from Kate for 3 weeks. I did not contact Rachel. I went to work. I attended Sunday service at Grace Fellowship. I sat in the same pew where my mother had sat every Sunday for 31 years. The violin case was at home, in the corner of my bedroom, with the broken instrument still inside. I had not been able to bring myself to move it. Kate called on a Wednesday afternoon in early December. I want to meet again, she said. I have some things to share with you, and then I want to ask you a few more questions. We met at the same Cracker Barrel. Kate brought a folder of her own. What she had found, through public record requests, through interviews with people I had not named and did not know, was this: Rachel and James's franchise application for the Yukon location had been flagged during the state review process. Not because of me. Not because of the violin. Because of an irregularity in their financial disclosure documentation related to the Moore location. A discrepancy between the revenue figures they had submitted on the franchise renewal application 3 years earlier and their state business tax filings for the same period. Rachel had not told me about this because Rachel did not know that I would ever have reason to care. My cousin James had not told me about this because James is a state auditor who is very careful about what he says officially. But the discrepancy was in the public record once you knew where to look. And Kate knew where to look. I sat across from Kate in that booth and pressed my hands flat on the table. Outside, the parking lot was gray with December light. I breathed through it. She says the violin was accidental, I said. She's also applying for a 3rd franchise while her 2nd location has a flagged financial disclosure, Kate said. Those are 2 different stories. But they're related. They're both about a person who has consistently made choices and expected not to be accountable for them. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice right then. Kate said, I want to run both threads in the same piece. The property destruction, the family response, and the franchise disclosure situation. I'll give Rachel the opportunity to comment before we publish. That's standard. When would it run? If she responds promptly, about 2 weeks after I contact her. I said, okay. Kate contacted Rachel for comment on a Friday. Rachel did not respond directly to Kate. Rachel called me. It was a Saturday morning, 9:15, and I was making coffee when my phone rang. What did you do? Rachel said. Not a question. A statement delivered in a voice I had not heard from her since we were children fighting over something. I shared my documentation with a reporter, I said. You went to the media. Over a violin. I went to the media because you destroyed our mother's most valued possession and then sent me texts telling me that family forgives and moves forward, and then had an attorney tell me the destruction was accidental, and then refused any discussion of compensation. This is going to ruin us, she said. The franchise review, the disclosure thing, that's not even related to you, that's a paperwork error, and now it's going to be in the same article as, you are going to destroy my family over a violin. I said, Rachel, what do you think I should have done? Long pause. You should have forgiven and moved forward, she said. That's what Mom would have wanted. You said okay. In the parking lot, you said okay. I said okay, I said. I didn't say I agreed. Silence. I will pay you, she said. Whatever you want. Don't let this run. Call Alex, I said. Her number is on the demand letter you received 6 weeks ago. I hung up. Rachel called Alex within the hour. They spoke for 40 minutes. What Rachel proposed was full reimbursement of the $11,200 appraised value, plus the $340 window repair from the 4th of July cookout 2 years earlier, plus a written acknowledgement, not an apology, specifically an acknowledgement, that Tyler had intentionally removed the violin from its case and that it was destroyed as a result. Alex called me after. She also wants you to call the reporter and ask that the piece not run. I can't ask for that, I said. That story belongs to Kate now. I gave her my documentation. I can't unkill it. Alex said, I told her you would likely say that. Do I accept the settlement? Alex was quiet for a moment. The settlement makes you whole financially. The story is going to run regardless of whether you settle or not, because Kate has public record documents that don't require your cooperation to publish. Settling does not protect Rachel from the story. It just compensates you for what you lost. Then I accept. The wire transfer landed in my account on a Tuesday. $11,540, which was the violin, the window, and Alex's fee for drafting the demand letter. The story ran on a Thursday, 3 weeks before Christmas. It was published on the regional outlet's website with a photo of my mother from the church directory. Kate had found it in the church's public online archive, playing her violin at the Christmas concert in 2019. It named Rachel by first name. It referenced the franchise location names and the state licensing disclosure discrepancy. It quoted the Lutier's damage assessment letter. It quoted Rachel's text messages about family forgiving and moving forward. Rachel had declined to comment on the violin and provided a written statement about the disclosure discrepancy, calling it a paperwork error under review. The piece ran on Thursday. By Friday morning it had been shared 240 times on Facebook. By the following Monday, the franchise corporate parent had issued a statement confirming that the Yukon application was on administrative hold pending resolution of the disclosure review. By the end of January, the hold had extended to the more locations renewal, which was due in the spring. I do not know the final status of Rachel's franchise licenses. I did not follow it closely. That was not the point. The point was this. At the family reunion in August, in the fellowship hall where my mother had played violin for 31 years, Rachel stood over the wreckage of that instrument and told me that family forgives and moves forward, and she expected those words to close the matter. She used my mother's name to do it. She said it was what Mom would have wanted. My mother wrote a note to herself that I found in a cedar box after she died. The truth doesn't need you to defend it. Just preserve it. I had preserved it. Methodically. In a folder on my desktop, in letters on attorney letterhead, in a booth at Cracker Barrel with a recorder between 2 coffee cups. In January, I went to the luthier in Tulsa and asked him if he could recommend a replacement instrument in a similar range. Not identical, nothing would be identical, but something made in the same era, from the same tradition. He found one in February, a German workshop violin from the 1890s, structurally sound, with a warm tone. It cost $9,800. I bought it with part of the settlement. It does not sound like my mother's violin. Nothing will. But when I set it in the case and close the latch, it fits where the other one used to fit, and that is enough. My Aunt Linda called me after the story ran to say she had always known Rachel would push too far eventually. I thanked her and did not say anything else, because Linda is family and families are complicated, and I had said what I needed to say in the documentation and the demand letter and the booth at Cracker Barrel. I have not spoken to Rachel since the Saturday morning phone call. She has not called. Her Christmas card did not come this year, which is fine. James, her husband, sent a text in February that said only, "I hope we can get past this someday." I did not respond, because past it is not quite the right word for what I am. What I am is done. The violin Tyler smashed was not just an instrument. It was 31 Sunday mornings a year for 31 years. It was my mother's hands in 1987 and my mother's hands in 2019 and the burgundy velvet interior of a black case that still smells faintly like rosin and cedar. Rachel called that sentimental value. She said it like sentimental was a smaller category than financial, like emotional was a synonym for imaginary. She was wrong. But she will not be corrected by me. She has already been corrected by consequences, which do the job more cleanly and with less noise. I preserved the truth. I let it do its own work. That is what my mother would have wanted.